Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. If anyone wants to come and move forward, we're quite cosy in numbers than we thought it would be, so feel free to move forward. The session title is How Can You Be LGBT plus in Jewish and Orthodox community? And I feel very privileged to be sitting on this panel today with these wonderful people. The rationale for this session is that it feels like the landscape has changed dramatically over the last few years for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans people in the British Jewish community. Most importantly, people are actually having open conversations around issues that affect these communities now, be it from the pulpit, in the media, and also around our Shabbat tables. Whereas some rabbis of Central Orthodox communities, including Chief Rabbi Mervis, have actively spoken about the need to make LGBT plus members of the community feel included, others within Central and ultra-Orthodoxy still endorse a policy of intolerance. So today's panel aims to discuss whether it is indeed possible to have an authentic LGBT plus Jewish identity in an Orthodox Jewish community. It's also often said that the UK follows behind the USA and Israel in terms of LGBT plus inclusion, and so I'm pleased to introduce some of the USA's movers and shakers in the Jewish queer Orthodox community. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll answer questions, and we're going to take questions from the panel, questions from the floor at the end. If there's a clarification question that you need from any of us, then do put up your hand. Otherwise, if you could keep all your questions to the end, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. Go from right to left.
Hi everyone, I'm Joe. My pronouns are he and him. So I grew up in the UK, in a modern Orthodox home. Realised I was gay at a young age. I spent my life in the Jewish institutions, B'nai Akiva, Jewish high schools, primary schools. Knew I was gay from a very young age, and when I was 18, I came out to my parents and my siblings. At that point, I decided to try and alter my sexuality by signing 3 years in conversion therapy, which I say very casually, but I do not mean it in that flippant way. I then spent the next 5 or 6 years on a journey to accept myself, to grow into myself, in a community that didn't want to deal with me or accept me. I'm lucky enough to have the privilege to have used my voice to increase visibility of LGBT plus Jews in the UK, and look forward to sharing some more thoughts about where that's going with you today.
Hi everyone, my name is Shauna Levine. I grew up in Muncie, New York in the United States, in an ultra-Orthodox community. My family was Yeshiva Orthodox, and my extended family was Baba Hasidish. I grew up in mainstream Yeshivish ultra-Orthodox schools, started my coming out process at 15, and consider myself today very much to still be an Orthodox and queer Jewish person, and I'm excited to be here.
Probably should have said this earlier, but my name is David Shaw, pronouns he, him, them or they. I grew up in a traditional Orthodox Jewish family in north of London, and I've been volunteering in the LGBT Jewish community for about 15 years. I'm currently the chair of Gay Jews in London, and I am a family trustee of Keshe UK.
Hey, I'm Rachel Creed. I grew up in Fairfield, Connecticut in a modern Orthodox family. I went to Yeshiva University for 12 years straight, high school all the way through grad school. I came out when I realized I was gay when I was in Shonavette, which was really inconvenient, and I didn't come out until 9 years later. I am now the deputy director of an organization called JQI, which stands for Jewish Queer Youth. And our mission is to support and empower LGBTQ youth from Orthodox Hasidic and Sephardic homes. And the main programming we have is a teen drop-in center and crisis resources for at-risk youth.
Good afternoon. My name is Rabbi Mike Moskowitz. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the scholar in residence for trans and queer Jewish studies at CBST, Congregation based in Stereo, in New York City, which is the world's largest LGBT synagogue. I learned in very right-wing Lithuanian yeshivas. I have 3 orthodox smichas, and I spend most of my time in advocacy and allyship with the trans population and provide resources, the intersection of the trans experience in Jewish thought and Jewish law.
Thanks. So, as you know, we've got 3 panelists here from the States and 1 who's homegrown here in the UK. So the first question is for Joe. As a gay Jew, what has been your experience in choosing to negotiate a place for yourself within the Orthodox Jewish community in the UK?
So I'm going to speak about not what the practical experience has been, but more about what the emotional experience has been. I spoke before a little bit about what's been done and what's happening. But more recently, I felt tired, exhausted, sad, and a bit angry, a lot angry with the community that we're in. I've actually spent a lot of time in New York over the past few months, seeing communities that accept me in my full self. Going there and seeing what it's like to feel like that, to really feel the emotion of being accepted without any caveats or any conditions, has made me realize how much the Jewish community in the UK has taken from me and taken from other queer people. On a practical level, my experiences have been spending 3 years with B'nai Akiva, working with them to make the youth movement more inclusive. But why should I have to make the youth movement that I am born into more inclusive? Why should I have to do that? It feels tiring, it feels exhausting, and it leaves you feeling empty, it leaves you feeling like a shell of yourself. And I only realised that stepping outside. So I'm actually looking at my notes. I walk into this space, coming back from New York, feeling a lot of fear now. The emotion is predominantly fear, that now I've stepped out to explore communities outside of Orthodoxy, that the voice that I've been using, the privilege that I've been using to support communities of B'nai Akiva, or in synagogues in the UK, or Minyan in the UK, or whoever really is messaging me on Facebook with fears of not being included, will no longer be valid, will become hustle, because I've stepped out of the community. And I think that we should sit with that. I think that's the predominant experience that I'm having, the fear, sadness, and difficulty. And I think the place this conversation needs to start is the whole audience and the whole community needs to sit with that feeling that I'm feeling. They need to sit with the empathy of that emotion. That's why we're starting this conversation. And my experience isn't about halacha. I've realized now that it's deeply about emotions. And that's where I think this conversation should go.
Thanks, Joe. Having now heard Joe's experience from a UK-based perspective, I want to now turn our attention towards across the pond. So the question here is to 3 panelists. Speaking personally, or a situation involving people you know well, can you give us an overview of communal attitudes towards inclusion of LGBT Orthodox Jews in the States? We're going to start with Rachel.
Okay, so first of all, I run a drop-in center in New York for teens and young adults ages 13 to 23. It is a mental health resource for people who identify as LGBTQ and Jewish to come to meet with social workers, meet other people like them. And so I speak on behalf of my own experiences and also on behalf of the people that I work with at Moviv and amplify their voices a bit. One of the things that I think happens a lot is that when we have this conversation about how can we include LGBTQ kids specifically schools, and how do we make sure that we're including people in our schools, and at the same time we have these organizations that are working to, we have these kids who are from these Orthodox homes who are fighting really hard to stay part of Orthodoxy, and the strength that it takes to do that is huge. And at the same time, we have organizations that are built to bring kids closer to Orthodoxy. So we have NCSY, NCSY is the Orthodox Union's youth group, and a lot of the things that they work with kids who come from Orthodox homes and who come from secular homes to bring them closer to Judaism. And while those are all lovely organizations, there's this like thought in my mind that imagine if they could take the strength of the kids who are growing up LGBTQ and Orthodox, who are fighting to stay in the Orthodox communities, and like bottle that up. That's the answer to the other organizations. Like they have the kids that are LGBTQ and fighting to stay Orthodox and to stay part of their communities are the answer to all the other organizations that are trying to bring kids closer to Orthodoxy. So that's just my thought of my mind. Another thing that I experience is that a lot of times, but we're not actually talking about halacha when we talk about LGBTQ issues. I think we're talking about, it ends up a lot of times being homophobia masked under the guise of halacha. So the sentence that's quoted most and used then in a homophobic way is from Vayikra 18:22, which refers only to cisgender gay men, and is used as a homophobic way and to deal with all kinds of LGBTQ people, and that's clearly those are not everyone's included in that sentence, and so there are times that I think that it would always be better if there were people who were not cisgender gay men included in that cisgendered men included in that. It would be better if other people were included in that sentence, if I were included in that sentence, because it ends up being that I'm erased from the narrative. And so when we talk about the Orthodox community being homophobic and being transphobic, we're talking about it's more social than halachic in my experience. And that being said, there are a bunch of resources that we have in New York that are available in New York, but also available to others who are not in New York. And so we have, like I said, we have a drop-in center, but we also have a number of online communities. So if people are interested in joining them from anywhere in the world, we have a teen group, a secret group on Facebook. We have a young adult group on Facebook. We have a crisis line where anyone can call to speak to a social worker. And so there are a number of community resources available, not only in the US, but beyond that, that are accessible.
It's about 40 years ago when the synagogue that I work in started as an LGBT synagogue. People asked, how do you have a gay synagogue? And 40 years later, people are asking, why do you need to have a gay synagogue? Because in most Jewish communities, there aren't issues in joining as a member of the LGBT community. Orthodoxy is one of those exceptions. And even in Orthodox spaces, it's shifting, and I think it's really shifting quickly. When I teach in day schools, and even in modern Orthodox day schools, I ask the second, third, fourth graders, raise your hand if you don't know somebody who's trans. And one or two people might raise their hands. It's so easy to be afraid and hate that which we don't know and experience. And more people are out in Orthodox spaces as their true self, and they're still loved by family members. The baseline, I think, has shifted. When parents call me for guidance when their daughter comes back from seminary, it's I'm gay, can my girlfriend come for Shabbos? The questions are much more refined and nuanced about, should they sleep in separate rooms, what should we tell the siblings, right? But the idea that they're no longer welcome home is a real shift. Other examples, Haredi Yeshiva in Muncie sent me a boy, not to try to convince him that he's not gay, but to try to give him dating advice. It's a book, this is where we're at. We're not throwing him out for being gay, and we're not going to be proactive in finding him a shidduch. he's dating a guy, and he has questions we just don't feel comfortable answering, but we also don't feel comfortable telling him that he shouldn't have rabbinic resources. So that's like a huge space of advancement. I'm really optimistic that the safer we make this space for people to tell their first-person narratives, then not only does it advance the cause, because it allows people to be more tapped into the reality that there are queer and genderqueer Jews everywhere, but it also allows people to recognize that the need that we have as a community, as a straight, for those of us who identify as straight and cis, that we have part of our spiritual responsibility to God is to take care of the physical and emotional needs of all of God's children. And so the more that we can talk about allyship and spiritual practice, the more that we give language from within our tradition to uncover and to discover the divine intention of supporting Jews of LGBT experience, it'll continue to go in this direction. And so I'm optimistic.
In the U.S., especially in New York, we're pretty lucky in that there are resources like JQI. There's another resource called ESHL. ESHL is an organization that works for the inclusion of LGBTQ people and their families. One resource that they have is a parent support group that has a conference, a physical in-person conference, as well as a monthly conference call, and in-person meetings in different cities across the U.S. and help parents with their own coming out process. So we're lucky that in the U.S. there not only are people who are inherently vulnerable and struggling and just barely surviving, which is across the world LGBTQ. There are a number of LGBTQ people who are in that place, but we have people who are surviving, right? We built up a little bit of a community, and we have schools that are accepting, that are orthodox, and we have, there's just a community of orthodox queer people who support each other, and that's an amazing thing. So while there's still so much work to do to support vulnerable and closeted and people struggling who are orthodox and LGBTQ, there are people who are in a place where they're a little bit past surviving. But I want to speak to that in the U.S., I don't think that we really moved beyond survival. So maybe someone's not in a hospital and not thinking about dying all the time, and that's great, and people are self-resolved and feeling good about themselves and feeling great about their relationships with God and with Torah and have a community to go to, and that's awesome. But when they look ahead to see what is their future, it's just blank, right? What will happen when I have a family? Will I be accepted in a shul? And the truth is that there is a little bit of a ceiling, and when it's different to be accepted in an Orthodox shul in New York when you're a single gay person, and when you're a person in a relationship, and when you're a person with kids, and it really changes and becomes less and less welcoming. So we're in this place where I want to think past just surviving and think about what would it mean for LGBTQ observant folks to be thriving, right? What would it mean for us to have clear visions of what our futures look like, and have rabbinic mentors, and have just this knowledge that the rest of our lives will be welcome, not just in this moment. And I think that's where a lot of the work still needs to be done.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on something that you both said. Mike, you spoke about a parent who advising their child on dating and so on, which I think is, I've never heard of them in this community. And Rachel, you do amazing work with JQY. And I wondered whether, because of all the work that everyone really on the panel is doing in terms of activism, can you see a time where there wouldn't be a need for an organisation like JQY, where other youth movements and other community spaces are fully inclusive and welcoming of LGBT plus young people? Or do you think that there are specific needs and conversations that can only be had in a space that is facilitated by organisations like JQY?
So I do think that there will always be a need for organizations and resources like JQI. and that's not just because I'm biased. But there are just, well, first of all, their Orthodox community is a very large spectrum, at least from what I know in the US, that there is a huge range of what it means to be a part of an Orthodox community. And so while the modern Orthodox community is making great strides, the ultra-Orthodox communities the strides are not as large. And sort of as kids start coming out more and more from modern Orthodox homes, there will still be a need in other communities. There will always be a need in other communities if the communities are not moving at all at the same pace. But even if there was a time when every single denomination and type of Jewish community is accepting and loving and everyone has a place, there is something that's really special about having a space that is LGBTQ and for people who come from Orthodox communities. The conversations that we have there are conversations that we don't get to have anywhere else. So just for example, one of the icebreakers that we did at the drop-in center was everyone had to say their name and their pronouns and where they're from, and then it was, do you believe in unicorns, and if so, are they kosher? And all the kids in this room have this like incredible knowledge of Jewish texts and resources, and so we had these really intellectual, fascinating, smart conversations about this like sort of queer, like LGBTQ queer kind of thing in the context of halacha, and what if we could, or in the context of just using Jewish texts to talk about it, and being able to have that conversation with other people who are like you. It's just like, it's unlike anything that there ever could be in a space that's outside of places like that.
Thank you.
I hope that the work that I do at some point becomes unnecessary and obsolete, certainly from the perspective of being on the outside of the trans and queer experience. I think that first-person voice it's not replaceable. Allyship is awkward by its very nature, in that it's predicated on the world being broken. If we were all treated as equals, we would need to stand up for each other. That being said, each person is an individual, so I definitely see that there will always be a need to have the history, the culture, the camaraderie, the community of LGBT Jews, and that family structure does look different, can look different, as being a single parent can look different. So I think that having segregated spaces is important in order to be supportive, but I hope that it shifts to being supportive from having to advocate and to ally and to kind of push back against all the systems of oppression. I think even without those systems, there's still space for people to recognize the uniqueness of shared experiences.
So you're talking a bit about communal attitudes there. I want to move the conversation a little bit. I wonder what your experiences are or have been in working with Orthodox leadership.
So I'll start the conversation here in the UK. We're at Limmud. This space is probably the only space in the UK that I feel like I can be fully gay and Jewish, where rabbis and leadership approach me, speak to me as someone who is already included, already part of this community, here for the week, here in Birmingham in this kind of sacred, inclusive space. And that's the first thing I'd like to mention. It's really special that this space exists, and it's actually a huge refuge for queer Jews in the UK. Outside of the bubble of Limmud, I've had a range of experiences. From the first rabbi that I came out to, who fully supported me and stood by me throughout my whole coming out process with my family, spoke to literally each member of my family, I think, over the phone at different points, supporting them, helping them, discussing these halakhic questions of the unicorn be kosher, but the more kind of personal questions. And there have been rabbis that exist like that. They exist underground. They are slowly emerging. And I extremely appreciate it. The opposite experience I've had to that is rabbis who don't spend the time really investing in feeling the emotions and empathizing with the deep experiences that we're having. And this manifests in a number of ways, from kind of light exclusion, shall we say, to kind of full exclusion and attacks. So one rabbi I spoke to before a couple of years ago, the recommendation from him to include more LGBT Jews in shul was to have an underground like shir for LGBT Jews. And I asked him, but why can't we just come to the normal shir room and people can just be kind to us there? Or why can't I share my story in shul? It's just my story. I've been going to the shul for 26 years. No, unfortunately, that would mean that we accept you as a gay man. So there's that, and then there's the ugly, which is a kind of public shaming that rabbis have engaged in over the past 2 years. For me personally, and for other rabbis who stand up against homophobia, like Rabbi Black. And those rabbis, I'm not sure where the hatred is coming from, but the experiences that I've had have been extremely traumatizing. I spent Shabbat in my own community in Edgware, being publicly shamed by a rabbi. And I think the question that we have to ask about our leadership is, at what point did the rabbi become someone who actively excludes people because they don't fit in with an orthodox perspective of Judaism, and not a rabbi who is supposed to take Judaism and build people up with it so they can fully realize themselves in a relationship with God. I think that's a really important thing that the rabbis in this country have to start dealing with, and realize the effect that they are having on the human beings in this issue.
Very good.
So at JQI, we do work with a ton of rabbis from all kinds of Orthodox communities, and the thing that's interesting, it's hard to find any Orthodox rabbi who would say no to speaking with us. People are actually surprisingly willing to meet with us and to speak with us, and the issue isn't that they're not willing to talk to us. The issue is that all of these meetings that we have are these secret meetings that we're not allowed to tell anyone about. So what we basically have is we have a bunch of closeted meetings with people about the work that we're doing, and people are extremely supportive. Rabbis are extremely supportive behind closed doors. But I'm actually I'm struggling to even be able to bring up an example right now because I can't tell you about the meetings that we have. But I have we've met with a bunch of different Orthodox institutions and leadership of large Orthodox institutions, and the last line of one of the meetings that we had recently was, if you tell anyone that this meeting happened, this will be the last time you ever speak. And so it's complicated. There are some really positive conversations that we're having, and we are working together slowly behind the scenes. And also, there are people who need rabbis and leaders to speak up and to not be closeted about these conversations. The other thing that's interesting to note, I think, is that we don't have centralized leadership in the Orthodox community in New York or in the US at all. And so what ends up happening is this kind of diffusion of responsibility. So there will be with one person, and then that person will say oh, well, I'm supportive, but this person my hands are tied because of this. And then we go to the other person and say, oh, well, I'm supportive, but then my hands are tied because of this. And there's always somebody there's some mysterious someone who's tying everyone's hands that it's just, there's no accountability, and there's no, because everyone's able to pass on the responsibility to somebody else. So that's one thing. The other thing that I'll say is a lot of times rabbis will ask us, what happens if there's a kid who's on the fence, a kid who's not sure of their identity or of their sexual orientation, and what happens if they're like in the middle, like on the fence, and then we acknowledge that this identity exists, and we sort of like push them over the fence, and i.e. we make them gay somehow. I don't know, whatever. But my answer always is that there's like if a person is LGBTQ and Orthodox, the thing that they have the choice in choosing is the Orthodox part. And so when someone says like, what if we're putting our like hash or like our kosher symbol on being LGBTQ, that the thing that you're putting your F shirt on is not being LGBTQ, but it's remaining part of the Orthodox community. And I think that a lot of times our leadership is thinking in the wrong way about this, and that if we were to say, like, it's okay for you to come out and remain part of this community, that we would be in a totally different place.
I think it's important to mention there's a difference between being invited and being welcomed. And people can be inviting and still really not welcoming. And I think what's to me the most painful is what I perceive as a bastardization of our tradition, that God doesn't belong to the rabbis. The Torah was never given to the rabbis. The Torah was given to the community, to the people. Each one of us is in an intimate, unique relationship with God. And when rabbis get involved, it gets crowded. We're meant to provide access to resources. We're meant to give perspective. It's almost like a therapist or a counselor to help somebody navigate their relationship with God. And so the idea that a rabbi should be able to like give a perspective that like they own it, they monopolize, that God is constrained or limited to some sort of prefabricated masculine space where the aspect of the present mittens is for you to amputate or contort or deny your identity, so that you're not going to be in relationship with God Himself. And I think that that's something that theologically we need to be able to name, that if religion is about being in a relationship with God, how do we not create and support, provide the scaffolding for a relationship where a person is able to be who they are, holding all of those identities as a prerequisite for their relationship with God, not as a container to exclude them. Practically speaking, I'm in a lot of conversations with a lot of rabbis. They're not all positive. About 50% of the RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America, which is the largest group of Orthodox rabbis in America, about half of them support the work that I'm doing, the other half are in opposition. The RCA does not like making statements, especially in support of things that half are in opposition of. Privately, there's a lot of support, and many of the questions that I get from the rabbis are framed around, I would like to get there, can you show me the map? What do you do about this verse? How do you navigate this? I would like for this to happen, but I need to feel comfortable with the sources. So one of the ways in which we can kind of force the national conversation is to respond and name from the tradition what I think are the missteps of many that are acting from fear. The recurring line that I hear the most is not about Jewish law or God, but it's about people's comfort. And people there are the ones that have access, that don't ever suffer or struggle to be concerned with whether or not to be granted admittance between being welcomed and being invited even. And so I think part of the role that rabbis really have now is to try to bring it back to the God piece and to talk about our tradition and the tension that exists between loving God, really naming how there is no tension or conflict between loving God, loving God as children, and being able to show within our tradition, the rabbinic sources, and the rabbinic methodology, how the rabbinic approach needs to be one of radical inclusivity.
Thank you. Actually, that's a nice segue into the next question, which is, what are the text, practices, or experiences that the panel will see in Orthodox Judaism that give hope for LGBT lives?
I would say I find hope in my own relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is something that no one, no rabbi, no community, no shul, no school, no person can take away from me, right? For me, like every morning saying, thank you Hashem, she'asani kirtzono, you made me as I am, Elokai Hashem she'asati li tahori, like this life that you breathed into me is divine, is secret, is perfect. You did it knowingly, you did it intentionally, you created me exactly as I am. And in the in the davening that I do every morning, that I'm instructed to do, I have this like affirmation built in where if I ever have a moment of doubt that, and I you know, it would be abikarsis, it would be heresy to think that God made a mistake. But there are moments where, as an LGBT person, where you are constantly told that you are broken and that you are a mistake and that that there's something wrong with you. And there are moments of self-doubt where you think, did God make me broken? Did HaKadosh Baruch Hu make a mistake? And then built into my days, built into my tefillah, I have this affirmation like, no, Hashem made me as I am, exactly as I am, fully intending to create me this way. And for me, that's just so empowering to have it built into our very tradition and build this affirmation between me and God that, like, this is the way you made me, and you're taking ownership of that, and I'm taking ownership of that. And I think it creates this really beautiful relationship that continues every single morning. And I want other LGBT people to be able to tap into that.
So I'd like to reiterate that my relationship with God is what keeps me going. That one of the passages from the Limmud that we say during Shacharit about the Nedivim not trusting in nobles and officials and people in power, I really relate to that in the current moment. That when things are difficult, God is above any person. Another idea that I really have related to over the past few months, really I hold on to, is an idea that Rav Shai Howard from the Yeshiva Hadar that I'm currently studying in presented. And it's the idea of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, being a space that provides comfort to people from a world of discord and difficulty. It reminds people with this intense individual transient experience of unity and hope when they enter this sacred space. And for me, the texts of Judaism have begun to rise and be seen in a different way for me when I'm in spaces like that. And one in particular, is from Hallel. I studied architecture, so I latched onto anything about building. And it was Evan Masu Havonim Haitala Rosh Bina. And it means that the despised stone has now become the cornerstone. And I can only see that line as something that contained me when I was in a space like that. And I think we have to realize that Torah can be hidden and transparent when you're not in spaces that provide safety. And when you create those spaces, the letters rise, and you can begin to see them. One anecdote is I arrived in New York in the summer to spend 2 months studying in Yeshiva Hadar, and I went to shul on Shabbat, and it's Pride Shabbat, and I just doubled Hallel with the yeshiva, and I had this really emotional moment with Evan Masu Havonim, and the synagogue that Rabbi Mike worked in wrote a Al Hanisim prayer for Pride, and I'm like reading it like, oh, this is so great, like wow, and suddenly I just get struck, because the last line is Evan Masu Havonim Haitala Rosh Bina, and I'm sitting in a shul where there are a million of trans people, there are a million of queer couples. They are here, they are not going away, and the text rises to the occasion. And that's the things that kind of give me hope, creating spaces that you can see those texts.
Okay, so two things that give me hope. One is a text that we use at JQI as our guiding philosophy, which is the idea of Limmud and Jewish, from a story. There are two people who are arguing about an idea. Short version of the story. The voice comes down from heaven and says, Limmud, Divrei Elokim Chaim. And that both these and those are the words of the living God. And that this idea that there can be simultaneously conflicting truths that exist at the same time And that idea just that it's a Jewish idea that there can be things that are seemingly conflicting, that they both exist at the same time, and that can mean for a person who has multiple identities that seem to conflict, or it can be meant for a room of people where there are seemingly, like people in the room who might assume would be conflicting in that space, or ideas that would be conflicting, and that they can all exist at the same time, and all be true at the same time. So that's one thought. And the other thing that gives me hope is just seeing a community that comes together, specifically at the drop-in center, but in queer Jewish spaces. Just the drop-in center, we do an intake with every new person who comes in. So they meet with a social worker, and we do a risk analysis, and we see how just check in with how they're doing. And 70% of people who come in have expressed some kind of suicidality, and talk about that in their intakes. And when people, that's like before they get to the drop center, but when they come into the space, it's a room full of people where all the people in the room thought that they were the only ones like them in the world until they stepped into that room. And so that being in that space where there are people who all thought they were the only ones like them, and all of them are together, and what we built in that community is just, it's amazing, and there aren't words to describe the hope and the future that I see in that.
One of my favorite Talmudic texts speaks about a rabbi newly ordained, leaving yeshiva to go home for the first time, feeling very good about himself. And along the way, from Rashi, Elijah the prophet is sent to teach him a lesson. And so this guy is riding on a donkey home, and he sees somebody who looks very different. And immediately this young rabbi says, "Oh my gosh, you're strange looking. Is everybody from your town as ugly and as strange looking as you are?" So the stranger pauses, gathers his thoughts, and looks up and says, "It's a really good question, one who asked the craftsperson informed me. Because we're all created in the image of the divine, there's nothing wrong, there's nothing broken. And I think what gives me strength is to reflect on how much I've learned about God and gender and sexuality from those who have a different and strange experience than my own. As a cis person, my understanding of gender is limited to my own body. But seeing how listening to so many folks who give language to the experience that I think is an awareness on a soul level, I've learned so much about God. And I think as part of a cis community, identifying as cis, there's so much that we can learn about the way in which we should focus on our religious identity by learning from those who explore their own gender identity. And so I think there's just so much, if we could assume a posture of humility, the way in which the verse tells us, right? That, in fact, King David himself was in his own time protested. And that verse is an allusion to the cornerstone of the temple, that when the temple was being, Solomon, his son, dedicates it, the doors won't open. And it's in that moment when he says, in the honor of, the merit of David, your servant, the enemies of King David says that their faces turn black, for being embarrassed. So we all need to be humble to recognize that there's so little that we know. In fact, our rabbi tells us the highest level of knowledge is to know that we don't know. And so I think listening, more than anything else, is super important for those of us who have different experiences to recognize that it's actually a unique aspect of God that we're being exposed to, and that we need to treat it with that level of wholeness.
Thank you. In a moment, we're going to open up the floor to questions. But I think there's just one final question I want to ask the panel, which is, what would you say to an Orthodox person in the closet right now? And if you could keep your answers succinct, that would be much appreciated. We'd like to go first.
We love you, we see you, there are no extra people in the world. Your life is not hypothetical, and if you feel safe, and if you can find people that you can talk to, we want to see you, we want to hear you, we want to hug you, we want to learn from you.
there's a kid in JQI who came out recently who said that he was like surprised at how fine it was when he came out, and he only wished that he had suffered in silence for years and years and years, thinking that it would be like so horrible when he came out, and he only wished that he knew that it would be okay when he did come out. And so there are some spaces where, in those spaces, I would say, like, it's okay and it's going to be okay. And for the people who are not in those spaces, who are not ready, that we are fighting for you, and we will not stop fighting until you know everyone knows that they are supported and has resources, and that we're here and we're not going away.
Hashem loves you a lot. You're so important. You matter so much in this world. You're so not alone, and you need to do whatever you can to know that you're not alone. Whether that's a relationship with God, or a relationship with a community, or finding another LGBT person in the world who you can talk to, you need to deeply internalize that you're not alone, and that there are people who love you and will fight for you because you matter and we need you.
Hashem didn't make you orthodox, he didn't make you Haredi, he didn't make you Hasidish or Mazorti or Reform, he made you whole. He made you enough. And wherever you end up, whatever community, whatever space you end up, you are enough, and God is always, always with you.
Thank you very much. It's really, really moving. I'd like to open up the floor to questions. We've got a mic here. Thank you. This one first, please.
Hi there. Firstly, thank you. It's been a fascinating session. I wondered whether you had seen any difference as to how, let's stick with the Haredi community, I guess, for now, how the community has viewed different types of people within the LGBTQ spectrum. So, for example, I know personally, having grown up in the Haredi community, that various people will see gay Jews one way and will have a very different outlook on trans people, for example. So I wondered whether you could speak to that.
Is your question for any particular member of the panel?
For the whole panel.
Yeah, let's say that there are another couple of questions, and we'll come back and answer them. There was one that was
Although, being an Orthodox rabbi, the issue of gay marriage and the participation of the rabbis is one that must cause some pain, because we don't do gay marriages. How would you speak as an Orthodox Jew? How would you advise a rabbi to speak? I'm a rabbi. To teens who come out to you and it's one of their preoccupations.
How can we, in the UK, help the Rabbanim and the Beth-Din and these people, you're saying the rabbis, in quiet, being very supportive? How do we encourage their voices and their voices to the surface?
Thank you.
These are wonderful questions. Allyship is spiritual practice. I think we need to just speak more about it. The most important thing as an ally is to listen. Intentionality, I think, goes a long way. Certainly in the rabbinate, signage, having in America rainbow flags. It's a sign. Keshet, which is a wonderful organization in America, we have mentioned that. Out of Boston, they have a lot of signs. Trans Jews belong here. CBST, my synagogue is hosting the first ever trans Jews are here. Convening of its type in March 31st, Trans Day of Visibility. So providing resources, but also just letting people know they're welcome. When we can create an environment where people feel welcome, then we can also then hear from them what the needs are in the moment in this space. And I think that's the most important because everybody's needs are so individualized. Within the ultra-Orthodox world, there's more of a phobia around the trans experience than there is about the queer experience. There's a way in which it's very technical. The Torah says, right, the Torah says in Leviticus, and so like, okay, the Torah says a lot of things. So it's like not personally complicated. In those spaces, there's such an emphasis on gender-based spiritual practice and also on segregation by gender. Yeshivas only allow men in, right? In certain communities, men and women don't, walk on the same side of the street. In some of the grocery stores in my neighborhood, Yeshiva and Lakewood, they have separate hours for men and women. So the idea that somebody might be grocery shopping with them, right, might have been assigned a different gender is culturally for them much more difficult than the fact that the verse says. Although luckily, gender and wearing misgender clothing, I think is not complicated halakhically, where some of the other issues might be more technically complicated. So it's a function of the phobia of society. In terms of marriage, in America we have marriage equality, and we will continue. I think it's important to be sensitive to the language, that marriage is something that should be for everybody. Kiddushin is a very technical term. In like the Yeshiva Shrach, we say like the halachas gevei nesias, right? The Jewish law establishes the reality of something. When it comes to, for example, kosher meat, so once you do all the stages, you can see blood. That's not dam. So I think also marriage is something that speaks to a certain kind of expectation. And that's something that I think that as rabbis we should be able to support, especially because people are here and they're doing it. And when we talk about creating spaces for people to be in a relationship with God, there needs to be autonomy. I responded last week to an incident in the Orthodox world just pointing out the hypocrisy of being willing to say good Shabbos to somebody who might be coming out of the car Saturday morning, and that doesn't bother us that they might have a different Shabbos practice. But to say mazel tov to two men and to two women is something that we can't do because that's a different marriage than ours. So I think a lot of this needs to be, in terms of the counseling piece, a recognition of the reality of people's experiences, and also the tradition that we have, which provides us new opportunities to create space to hold it all without having to compromise on any of it. And I think that space now of creative production is the one that is not about inventing, but rather about uncovering and discovering the divine will.
I think in terms of encouraging rabbis to be more outspoken and to not have all these meetings in these closeted, secret kind of ways, I think a lot of times the leadership sort of leads with the community behind them, and there's a big fear of the community all being extremely upset. And so about whatever it may be that is seemingly controversial. And I think that the more vocal community members are about their support, I think the more likely it will be that the leadership will be more vocal about their support. And so whatever way that means, I think sometimes people will give stuff or charity with the without putting your name on it. It's considered maybe higher or more selfless. And I think that in this case, I think if you donate to or you support an organization that supports LGBT people from the Jewish communities, put your name on it and plaster it everywhere. And make sure that everybody knows that you are supported and that you encourage your leadership to be supported as well. And I also just would point out that in terms of speaking to teens and addressing their concerns, most teens that we work with that come to us are not concerned about marriage or about halacha and reconciling their identities. Most kids that come to us are concerned about just feeling like they don't want to be rejected. And so it's important to know, I think, that before we even get to all of these conversations about halacha and marriage and all of those things, that some of the biggest fears are just, I want to have friends, and I want to have a family that supports me, and I want to not be kicked out of my school and my house, and I want to not be isolated. And so I think that those are the conversations we need to be thinking of and responding to before we even get to conversations beyond that.
Could I just say, my question was specific because someone has actually asked me, I know that you can't get married in an Orthodox synagogue if you're gay, or something like that. That's the specific issue that they were concerned about.
Can you repeat the question? We have no idea.
I mean, you're talking about it in a much more general way, but I was specifically asking it that question. Do you want to do it afterwards?
Let's talk afterwards. We'll take a few more questions, yeah.
I'll try to be loud until the mic comes. Thank you all so much. My question is, what can the non-Orthodox Jewish community do to support the Orthodox community as they are on this journey? Because I don't think I need to say anymore. But I want to know, like, what those of us that may be in shuls and communities where, like, you know, our rabbis are queer, or like most of the leadership in our communities are queer identifying or queer adjacent or queer supporting. How can we support you in ways that, like, we still have a lot of work to do amongst denominations Jewishly as well?
Thank you. So one here, please.
I have kind of one question, which is two parts. But as an Orthodox rabbi of an Orthodox community, if you came into my community, what would you want from me? And connected to that, do we need more openly LGBT Orthodox rabbis?
I've had an imaginary conversation with my own rabbi because I haven't had the real one yet, and I wondered if there was one sentence that you could come up with of how to begin that conversation, because I'm stuck.
In terms of non-Orthodox Jews supporting Orthodox LGBTQ Jews, for me the first thing that comes up is legislation. No matter what, we still live in a physical, geographical place under government, and legislation that supports safety, that protects people from losing their jobs, that does not protect religious people for discriminating against queer and trans people, like get out in the streets, vote. Legislation is really important. And also know that there will be lots of people who are LGBTQ who will leave their Orthodox communities and are going to come to your community and maybe are not going to know the right things to say or know the right tunes and might need a little bit of extra help just to be welcoming to them.
What can Orthodox communities do? Hold the space for us when we need to come to you, and also this is going to sound like negative, but it's not negative. I think accept us as we are when we come to your communities. For a lot of Orthodox people, it's not an option to be Orthodox or deeply halakhic, and that doesn't reflect the community that they're entering. Respect that and hold that for them as well, because they need. They often encounter spaces. We often encounter spaces. We are in spaces that need healing, and I think we have to hold that complexity. I think everyone has to hold that complexity. In terms of what would you want from an Orthodox rabbi, and how to start a conversation with an Orthodox rabbi? Sorry, that's not making sense. What would you want from an Orthodox rabbi? Action, words, welcoming, to put as much energy and work into welcoming us as we do to stay in their communities, to really speak up and just lower the obstacles. Like, there are obstacles that can be lowered now. You can add more inclusive options to your membership forms. That's not a halakhic issue. You can add a line in your newsletter about welcoming LGBT people. That's not promoting a lifestyle that you don't necessarily support. All of the little things that aren't halakhic that you can do them. And reassure anyone who wants to get married or anyone who wants to be part of the community in the future that you will be there for them. You will stand up for of them in the conversation, and that you are a constant in their life. There's no dependent. There's nothing that depends on. There's no caveat to that relationship. Your relationship with them is strong and it won't disappear.
One addition, don't wait for someone to come out in your community. Preemptively make it a welcoming space.
So I would just add that Orthodox spaces, the baseline assumption in Orthodox spaces is that they are going to be homophobic unless they say otherwise. And so silence is perceived as rejection, and therefore the words are just so important. I would also add that any kind of tiny little symbol that you can put somewhere that makes it seem like we're welcoming, even if it's like the tiniest little safe space sticker, to me it feels like seeing a mezuzah in the middle of like a desert where there are no Jews around, and you see that mezuzah and you're like, oh my god, there's someone like me here, or I have some kind of support, and it's to a person who needs to see it, it will be visible to them and they'll see it. And in terms of starting a conversation, I think you just have to start the conversation and take it from there.
Really quickly, I think dialogue is really important, and there isn't enough. I know it's complicated, that there aren't that many certainly Haredi people here. I think it's on us to own it. So if you're willing to extend the conversations of like, let's talk, let's go for coffee, that all is good. I think as rabbis, people want to be heard, and I think if you're willing to speak from the heart, there's something super powerful when it's personal. And thank you all very much for listening.
Well, I just want to thank the panel for giving their time and bringing this to me. I know the panel are all here until the end of the Limmud, so I'm sure we'll be happy to answer your questions, in the lunch queue or anything. And the other thing is, for those who are still interested in this or who are very interested in this topic, there's another session in Red 22 at 5:30, which is talking about Chief Rabbi Mervis's guide to LGBT inclusion in Jewish schools or not Jewish schools, which you're all welcome to.
And I'm going to use my provocative got a mic and thank Dave for actually doing the legwork together.
Yes, also we've recorded this, and there will be a recording of this, which we will communicate at a later date.
It will be there, we'll get it up to you.
And there's still classes on allyship and other things to look out for on these topics.
And if you are comfortable to approach us at Limmud, or you know anyone isn't comfortable to approach us at Limmud, we're all available on Facebook or any means of contact to speak more privately and support people in that way. So if it's not yours, it's not safe for you.
And if you're looking for some more resources, you can find us. We have tons of resources available.